Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, exactly.
How many in the disposals report? How many in the
Don't tempt fate, boss. Don't tempt fate.
Right, Dr. Levy, Mr. Warburton, Mr. Lambert, and Richard. I saw Richard here as well. And Mark. Welcome. Oh, Mark Lambert. Sorry, it was Mark Lambert. Yep. Yeah. And Matthew is. Oh, yep. And Matthew's available for questions. David Lester. Welcome.
Mr. Chair, councillors, thank you very much for your time. So we have public transport as a priority for our transport system in Auckland. Rapid transit is a critical part of that priority, and rail is a critical part of rapid transit. As it turns out, the electrification and EMU process has been much more successful than originally anticipated. It is likely that we will hit the 20 million trips probably next month. 20.8 million trips was the forecast for 2023. It is likely that we will achieve that 5.5 years in advance. And the speed at which the growth continues has been something that we've been monitoring, and since late last year we've been working on the case as to whether there are further EMUs required to ensure capacity is met. And as we've been working through this, we've also been working through the potential for independent powered EMUs, and that would create a value-added opportunity for the leg from Papakura to Pukekohe. So as it turns out, we've presented this case. We realise that there's issues about timing. The sensitivity analysis, as we continue to develop it, keeps changing. Also, as we will talk about this morning, the costs and benefit cost ratio that appears in your case has altered as negotiations have continued, and the cost is now down from 207 million to 198, and the BCR is increased as well, which Mark and David will talk about more. So we're looking for support for this case. We realise that we have to balance our plan in order for this to be able to be secured, and we are very willing to do that, and that is of course a requirement of your case and one of its recommendations. Mr. Chair, if I could just ask David and Mark to just add some more detail, and then we'd be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and councillors. Very quickly, I think if I can just add the reasons for the timing, that we believe that we will run out of trains by 2019. We've done everything operationally we can to increase capacity by reducing headways, and we've already achieved savings in that area. We will just need to get more trains to achieve that. In addition, you'll be aware of the developments down the south through the HIF fund, which also is targeting outturn by 2019. This timing will allow that to be addressed as well. In addition, the independently powered or battery-based EMUs will provide a lot of flexibility, not just to get to Pukekohe. They will provide resilience on the network if there are any power outages. They will allow us to work through power outages, which is quite a critical one with the CRL construction. The Mount Eden area will be out of power while the construction's going on, so the battery trains can effectively go through the power out section and keep operating. And ultimately they will be able to service south of Pukekohe if that's electrified. So even if the decision was made today to electrify, we would still need to buy the extra trains for capacity and service, and we will be able to service Pukekohe approximately 5 years earlier than we would if the decision was made today with consents to do the delivery of electrification. So from a timing point of view, a flexibility point of view, and an operational point of view, this is actually quite critical. Perhaps I should just finish by saying we've been working on this for over 2 years. So while the technology in one sense is new, in another sense it's not. If we'd been implementing it 2 years ago, we would have been very much on the edge of the curve. there are now trains being trialled and tested, and as we've indicated in the business case, we actually have warranties in excess of 10 years for the batteries. So we've actually got a pretty secure system, and the costs are coming down all the time because of the technology developments. Happy to take questions unless Mark wants to add anything more.
The only thing I'd add, Mr Chairman, is just in terms of output that we will see from 2019-20 on the rail network, this will allow us to maximise throughput through Britomart prior to CRL in the peak and the shoulder peak. That's a 2-hour period, particularly in the morning, and we'll be able to operate all trains at 6 cars, whereas at the moment we can only operate 3 cars. And obviously, as David says, the battery capability allows us to run through services from Pukekohe to Britomart. Thank you.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Look, before, gentlemen, we go into the debates of the train, I just want to ask you some questions around the process. Why is this the first time that this committee has learnt that you need to buy new trains urgently? Why, in your presentation to us last May, or this May I should say, days before the Auckland Transport Board approved a business case, that this wasn't even highlighted in your report to councillors? I've got it here. You talk about what you want to do for the annual plan, and you talk about what's gearing up for the next LTP, and it's not even there at all. Even though you mentioned, and you've mentioned again today, that you have some really successful, and I don't want to underestimate the success of the rail patronage, 20 million happening even faster than you suggested even in May. But I want to know why 3 weeks after we approved an extra $175 million for you in 17-18, we went up from 587 to 766 million. You now want an extra minimum of 10 million, potentially 25 this year. I also want to know why that you think that this is okay and we're perilously close to our debt to revenue ratios, as you have referenced in the report, that you don't suggest we take 10 million from something else necessarily, or do you, or 25 million, to the money that we've already given you. And finally, how do you think this report shows a positive attitude and your willingness to abide by our agreed statements of intent and letters of expectation and the no surprises working together? Because, gentlemen, this isn't a surprise, it's a huge shock. It's a lot of money and it's a big investment. And I don't think you've handled the process very well. So I'm interested in those answers, please.
Okay, so thank you. I'll ask David to talk in this in more detail. So this is unfortunate. It was in fact a surprise in a sense to me as well, because when this came as a case to the Auckland Transport Board, part of the recommendations were that they were in discussions with the council and with NZTA about the need and the funding requirements. So David will talk more, and Mark, in the detail of how this came up against the shoulder of the RLTP and what the options are. Of course there are options, but the best option for us and the city would be to be able to bring it forward. But I'll ask David and Mark to talk more about the actual detail.
Fair points, but I think there's a few other mitigating ones that we need to talk about. I have talked about the battery EMUs around this table on a number of occasions. You're absolutely right, we didn't raise it in May. We were, to be honest, I have always thought that the council was aware that we were working on this. The councillors were cognizant of it. We were working through the detail at the time, so we did not have a position that we could physically nail on both the business case, the NZTA indicative approvals, and the timing of it. So we didn't put it into the May report. We are aware, as we've said, that if this is approved, it is an accelerated requirement, and we would need to make some changes to the cash allocations for the capital program in the 17-18 year. And we've had discussions with the supplier to actually minimise what the requirements would be from a cash flow point of view. All that will happen here is that council can either delay it and put it into the RLTP, in which case you won't have trains till 2020-21, or approve it now and we get it in 19. So it's simply a case of bringing it to the table to say it's possible to schedule it, it's possible to deliver it early, it's possible to meet the HIF requirements based on the information we now have at hand, and we're putting it up to council for consideration, recognising that some changes would be made. It is a moving feast and it is changing, and we're putting it on the table. If council don't want to do it, then it'll just be put back into the RLTP process.
I'll have one supplementary, if I may, Mr. Chairman. And can I ask that you don't ever surprise us again? That you just, this is a financial, financial performance. I mean, you have to treat this council with a little bit more respect for keeping us absolutely abreast of such huge financial implications. Thank you.
Yeah, and point taken, I did discuss with management that a simple way of resolving this would have been to have a placeholder, because whether it was then approved or not, council could have taken this into context in its financial planning. So that is an apology, but there was a bit of a disconnect because actually our board had understood that there was awareness of this. So, but we take responsibility, we apologise, and we will ensure also closer oversight of this from a board perspective so that we don't have any assumptions. So I apologise.
Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I take my question, I just want to acknowledge David Warburton for the work that he has undertaken to try and grapple with the challenge of getting electrification to Pukekohe. Pukekohe is one of the major growth areas that we're trying to service, and it was a mistake, in my opinion, that electrification wasn't taken to Pukekohe from day one. The question I have that I want to put specifically to David is around the relationship with CAF, how that's going, and secondly, why there were not more units, EMUs, ordered initially, going back 2013 or whenever?
So the first part of your question is the relationship is very strong. I think we've been exceedingly fortunate with CAF's willingness to cooperate. They have actually participated in the design of these battery EMUs, and we've gone with Lloyd Major, one of our design engineers, have worked with them on this program. If you go back 2 years, we were going to be losing over 20% of capacity within the middle car. We've now redesigned all that, so it's virtually none. So we've done a lot of work with them to optimise the whole program. So we're very fortunate to have that, and they've been very open and transparent, and the pricing that they have put through here is particularly good. And the Lester made a comment about the prices coming down. Every time they get a better price, they pass it on to us, which is indicative of the nature of the relationship. In terms of your second question, the 57 3-car EMUs was based on the historic patronage and the projection of a requirement through till 2023-24, when CRL was projected to be built at the time that the orders were placed in 2011. So that was seen to be a prudent number to purchase, and it was decided. No one ever projected that we would be growing at 20% compounding per annum in the early stages. So it's a trite comment, but we're almost victims of our own success.
Mr. Chairman, my second question is, how many times have you presented to this council and to the former council, Len Brown Council, on the need for an increase in EMUs if we are to progress as is required under the SOI?
Oh, I think I couldn't give you an exact number, Councillor.
I can recall 5 times, but I just wanted to know
multiple occasions
specifically.
that we've done it, and I think, to be fair, the point that Councillor Simpson's raised is valid, but as a consequence, I actually assumed that councillors were conversant with it, and we should have been more explicit as we got to finalising the capital requirements and the timing.
So if you can just then take me through, if we are able to get progress today, what will the implications be for the South with these units? Could you give a little bit more detail on what the outcome is likely to be?
If the decision's made as proposed, and we get equivalent confirmation from NZTA, which we believe is likely based on Council's share of the 100 million, then we would be able to place the order in September with the August NZTA board meeting, and CAF have confirmed that they will have trains operating here by 2019.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to move these recommendations as appropriate.
Mr. Chairman, may I just add to that very quickly this point? The other thing that we just also need to be transparent about is that the sensitivity analysis, and Mark may wish to speak to this, is very complex and it's just been changing all of the time, and there is no ultimate guarantee that if this uptake continues, that in due course there won't be a greater further requirement for EMUs. We have tried to accommodate, and I think it's just worth Mark talking about this, we've tried to accommodate this completely as possible in this request. But, you know, it's pretty obvious, you know, that 20% of 10 million trips is 2 million, but when it becomes 20% of 20 million trips, it's 4 million, and it just, the numbers actually grow pretty quickly. I think the second thing, if I just might, because I think we do need to clear the air on this, there's absolutely respect, Councillor Desley, Councillor Simpson, there's absolute respect for the Council, the Mayor, and everything you stand for, and we would do nothing to breach that. So we are very sorry about this, and we will make sure that it doesn't happen again. We take your point completely. But I think it would be worth Mark just talking about the sensitivity analysis, quite important.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chairman. So the original EMU purchase was based on a 3% growth per annum from 2016, which allowed for an initial increase following EMU introduction. What this business case assumes is a 10% growth this year as per the SOI, not 3%, and then an ongoing through to the opening of the CRL in 2023 of 8%. Now, if growth actually increases beyond that, prior to the CRL opening, we will have to look at alternative service patterns because, as I mentioned earlier, we are maximising in the 2-hour peak and shoulder peak in the morning, throughput through Britomart prior to CRL. We have an option built into the order with CAF potentially, which allows us to, at some point in the future, assuming approvals and funding come through, to purchase another 8 if we breached the 10% or 8% growth, and we were able to actually spread the capacity across alternative services which didn't go into Britomart prior to CRL.
Finally, can you confirm that our CEO, Mr. Town, has been aware of this requirement for as long as the last 2 years?
Yeah, I've talked to Stephen about it.
Thank you.
Right, we have quite a batting order, just so I'll read them out so you don't feel forgotten. There's Councillor Hills, Newman, Mayor Goff, Cashmore, Casey, Wayne Walker, Councillor Darby and Councillor Mikely. So, Councillor Hills.
Cool, thank you, Chair. This is great, although I'm seeing 17 3-car units, but we were talking about 6-car. Are we talking about attaching other cars, or do we need to be ordering more than 17 3-car units, or is, just...
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman. We're ordering 17 3-cars, which allows us to couple up to the existing residual 3 cars in the 2-hour morning peak.
Thank you.
Perfect. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will speak to this later, but being a councillor from Papakura, it might give you an indication as to how I see this issue. My questions relate to the technology itself, and okay, so the paper goes with the CAF option, which is set out in the report, paras 21 to 23. What I'm looking for is more information about the deployment of this battery technology for commercial operations with passenger cars and other jurisdictions. Can you elaborate if there has been a deployment of this technology elsewhere? Where is it? How long has it been operating? And what was the impact of that?
It's been operating in a number of different jurisdictions, and they're continuing to operate. There are units operating in China now. There are units operating in Europe. I'm pretty sure there's one operating in Japan as well. And in terms of the battery technology, we've been working with China, Korea, and Europe in terms of the technology. Everything that we are doing has to comply with international standards for tunnel operation, because we have to make it future-proofed for CRL. So we can't get just any battery. We have to actually have them certifiable. So they are proven, which is why this spec is based on a warranty of 10 plus years.
Have there been any safety issues identified with this technology elsewhere?
No.
Okay.
And the whole units are thermally controlled as part of their operation, and part of the design actually is cooling systems for the whole battery network.
Okay, I'll reserve the right to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I've got 3 questions, but I just want to preface those by saying this is great news for public transport and great news for relieving some of the congestion problems that will otherwise be increasing in the south. We would like, as Councillor Simpson said, to have had it within our annual plan framework, and thank you, Lester Levy, for your assurances on that. My first question is, I think Lester mentioned that you'd knocked the cost back from the 207 million that we've provided for to 198 million. Now, that part of it was news to me. How have you done that, and what's the certainty of it? Because we're voting we're voting for the figure of 207 million today.
So that changed over the weekend, Mr. Chairman.
That is very recent.
Which is the whole point about the relationship with CAF, as we refine design and we get updates on the pricing. And what we've gone for on the 207 is in fact a sure number. I suspect within the next 6 to 9 months, as we refine the final design feeding into construction, there may well be even more changes in terms of the pricing, particularly around the battery technology, which is, to be blunt, changing on a weekly and monthly basis, and we are at the leading edge of that.
So that drop of 9 million is the offer that CAF has made?
Correct.
Premised on their costs dropping or their wanting to be more competitive?
Correct.
Yeah. The second question is in relation to the alternative option B in section 16. There's a huge difference between CAF batteries at 200, and with Korean batteries, we'd dropped the price by $33 million. I mean, that's enormous, because we're not talking about the units, we're talking just about the batteries, aren't we? Can you give councillors an explanation as to why there would be that big a gap between the CAF battery and the Korean battery, and whether you think the Korean option is comparing oranges with oranges?
So the short answer is that at the time of putting this together, as of today as well, the Korean batteries are not warranted. They don't comply with all the international standards, and we couldn't put anything together on the basis of that is a justifiable cost that would provide the health and safety and security requirements for the operation of the network. If in the next 6 to 12 months the Koreans can actually achieve the compliance with the international standards and can provide a warranty in excess of 10 years, then we have an agreement with CAF that we will sit down and work with them in terms of the battery supplier. So it's a third-party supplier. CAF are working with somebody who is already accredited, and in Councillor Newman's comments, batteries that are currently working in a number of situations. We would need to get the confidence to do that. 30 million is a lot of money. It'd be nice to save it, but it would be foolish if we ended up with a ball of fire on the track to save 30 million.
Yep, that's a fairly clear message. The third question, we bring forward effectively electrification to Pukekohe by 5 years. So it's absolutely worth doing. Actually, more than 5 years. No, it'll be 6 years, I think, from 2025 to 2019. At the point that we've electrified the southern line, will these battery-powered units be available for the Kumu-Huapai line, which probably can't be electrified in the foreseeable future? And are there, I mean, I know you have to make some changes because of the tunnel configuration, but is there any reason why these units wouldn't be able to be available to provide an electrified service to Kumu-Huapai, which would have grown considerably by the time that they would be available for transfer?
So we are working with CAF to ensure a structural design that will go through the tunnel. That is the first challenge. Because of the height of the tunnel, we actually have to limit the height of the units, and with the battery cars we've got to do some modifications on that. So we have decided that we will feed that into the design, and that's currently being done as a variation in terms of the detail that we're working through. That would physically allow us to get through to Kumu and Huapai. The issue, as you mentioned, is the safety issue through the tunnel. Because they're so narrow, exit would need to be through the front or rear of the carriages because of the tunnel not wide enough to be able to exit out of the side doors, and we would have to design in a safety mechanism for being able to get out through basically the front window or the rear window. That's doable, and we would need to do that if we were going to run through to Kumu and Huapai on an EMU.
So the short answer is you can make the modifications, and subject to a business case, it could well be that we could provide an electrified service to Kumu and Huapai.
Yes, but of course Pocono and Mercer would require nothing. Because it would be an extension on the other way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So supplementary to that, so if we can make it work for potential use beyond Swanson, then this actually strengthens this business case.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And just for the Mayor, in relation to item, his first question, Resolution A approves in principle the procurement, so we're actually only committing to B at this stage. So to give you the assurance on making the savings, and if we can.
Yeah.
Councillor Cashmore.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. So Mark pretty much answered my question, but are we going to need a third tranche of units at some point in time, and how many units, and what sort of year we're looking at? So that's pretty well answered. My other question is relating exactly what the Mayor just put up. It's about the North Waikato. And has there been any discussions with their regional council or North Waikato District Council about units running to there and cost sharing and so forth going forward into the future?
There has been some early discussions, Councillor Cashmore, through the Chair. There have been no detail in terms of dollars changing hands, and that would need to be a three-way discussion with NZT as well because of the subsidy program.
But
so,
principle of user pay should apply.
There has also been discussion by the Waikato entities about electrifying beyond Pukekohe. It's a bigger discussion with the Crown. And I think the additional EMUs that Mark talked about will be required post CRL, because that actually opens up the capacity of the track.
Yeah.
Councillor Casey.
Yeah, I've got 3 questions. My first one is, what aren't you doing to get the 50 million?
Balancing the capital project, what aren't we doing? Balancing the capital project.
I don't know. It's a bit like what don't you know? What do you mean? What?
Where are you getting the 50 million from?
Sorry.
What aren't you doing?
Savings
Because
required.
we'd quite like a say in that.
Oh, we can sit down. I mean, we would just take 10 million out of the program. To be honest, if we're spending 720 million and we take 10 million out of it to move it one way or the other, we're talking about a few percent of the overall shift. I haven't got the exact project right now that would change.
So you haven't looked into the 50 million already?
Pardon?
You haven't looked into it already?
No, because we don't. The program doesn't go to the dollar over 725 million because we you don't know what the timing is going to be on consenting and property purchases. So it's a refined program that we work our way through. As you know, every year we come in within 95 to 98% of our capital program because we manage the program to meet the expenditure around the envelope that council's agreed.
So what would be the process for negotiating that 50 million with the elected members around this table?
It would come through to the board in terms of a project requirement if it was a change. And it could be, I mean, any one program would only have to be a few weeks late, to be honest, councillor, that would accommodate 10 million. A wet summer or winter will move the capital program by 10 million just because of construction delays.
So I think effectively the program is always managed around timing. So this could be accommodated around timing. It doesn't mean a project gets extracted out of the process. So there's always this flexibility around timing, some of which is proactive and some of which, as David says, with weather and consenting is reactive. So the program is always being managed to deliver as much as possible. Yep.
Thanks for the answer. My second question relates to you mentioned just in passing that the battery trains would operate through Mount Eden when there's no passage. Can you just tell me a bit more about that in terms of the time that you expect that would need to happen?
The timing of it will be when the CRL...
No. How long, sorry, how long would we need to have the battery trains running?
I suspect the contract will be running for a couple of years through the Mount Eden construction period.
2 years.
But I can't tell you exactly without looking at the CRL construction program.
So that leads on nicely to my last question. If we don't do this, what happens at Mount Eden?
There'll be shuttle services,
Bus.
or the contract will be managed differently because there will be sections of track operating on power on, and then there will be time off when they can actually work on the line. They can't work on the line with the overhead power activated because it's a live area with 25 kV above them.
Which leads into my final question, which is, if you get a no today, what's your risk management around that?
Well, nothing, because CRL won't be opening up Mount Eden in 2019. So
not in relation to Mount Eden, I mean generally.
Well, everything will be delayed. You will end up. We will place an order in 2018, assuming it goes through the RLTP program. Everything will be a year later, and we will manage people the best we can. If they get left on the station, they get left on the station. We won't be able to pick them up.
I think the critical underlying issue, and this is the reason for the urgency, is that we have got very serious momentum around rail, and we can't afford to lose that momentum, because you just get to the point where the standing room only, you have to reconfigure seating to allow more people to be shoved into the trains, that people who are making mindful decisions about making a modal shift will lose interest. And we believe we can't afford that, because when you have a look at this growth, it's pretty phenomenal, even when you compare it to other jurisdictions. And we want to keep that up, because we have a limited rail network, and we want to extract the greatest value for money out of that network. So we just believe that losing momentum will be a very negative issue, one that will not easily or potentially not able to be recovered. So that's the underlying issue. It's all about capacity. And we have put a lot of effort into improving the service, improving the predictability, the reliability, and we just don't want to lose any momentum. And I think it would be a very negative thing if we did. So that's the issue. Otherwise, there are no other mitigations for that.
The only other option I might add to the Chairman's comment, or my Chairman's comment, is that we would have to start looking, if it was delayed too long, with refurbishment of the diesel locos and Papakura Pukekohe operation, because we would be waiting 5 to 6 years before electrification, so we'd actually have to invest in the upgrade of the diesel stock to actually maintain that service.
Just if I may, just a supplementary based on the response, why have you flatlined at 8% then from 2019 out? Because what the words are saying to me is that it's going to keep going up, but what your patronage figures in this report are is that it flattens off.
Yeah. Mark?
Well, if we, it's a damned if you do and damned if you don't, to be bluntly honest. If we kept projections in at 15+%, I suspect we'd be asked questions about why are you projecting that growth rates will continue at that unprecedented level ad infinitum. So all we're saying is trying to be conservative and saying we've had a burst, it may flatten off, let's take a reasonable position. It's still on global trends a very high growth rate.
But also we are optimising the network, as Mark was talking about. So, you know, when that gets all exhausted, as it will, then you lose that option. So, yeah, look, it's... I think we just have to wait and see how it unfolds. We think at the moment that this is a reasonable request that we have got a good basis of evidence for. But that's why I said there's no guarantee as how the growth will unfold.
Councillor Walker, Wayne Walker.
Yeah, just got a few questions. First off, it is mentioned in the business case around having a charging facility at Pukekohe. There's a $2 million cost attached to that. Is that costed into the proposition here or not?
We don't need it now with the new battery technology. We can go to Pukekohe and back without charging.
And just around the batteries, I mean, the lithium-ion batteries, have we had Tesla in the mix around battery supply, for example? A pretty big plant.
I don't think Tesla per se have been talked to, but we are dealing with global battery manufacturers. The duty cycles on trains are actually much harder than they are on a car because of the size and scale. And we're talking an industrial application that's going almost 24/7. So it's a different spec of battery.
And just the other question, just particularly around the batteries, do we have some flexibility in our contract to make adjustments around price and the like? Because I would anticipate that you know, the batteries will probably be one of the last things to be manufactured. I mean, you'd probably put that off as late as you can, and it may well be that the price goes down. The technology will probably be significantly enhanced within a couple of years. So we've got flexibility around that.
Well, that's why we actually put the Korean option in there, so you could see the range we were dealing with. And of course, we wouldn't have done that if we didn't have the flexibility to be able to do it.
And just around that option,
Councillor Walker, can you speak into the speaker?
Just around that option, I mean, do we have the ability to modify that option if there's another supplier or a change in technology that comes on stream in the interim? You know, we're looking a couple of years out.
I think we need to be careful that we don't end up having a contract that's so flexible that it kind of looks like a house built with a series of leftovers. In principle, CAF have always taken the view that they will work with us to optimise the supply. We've done that with everything else to date, and changing the batteries will not in isolation make sense unless we look at everything else, because the battery management system, the current flows, the life cycles will all have to be as part of the control system. So the answer is yes, we will have the option to make changes, but it's not like going to the supermarket and replacing one set of batteries for another.
But it is worth saying that CAF is a very sensible commercial supplier, and they will be looking to have a product that has got the best and widest application, and that is part of the flexibility in this, that they're not wedded to their own battery solution. That's why they're prepared to look at the others. So I think that's a very positive aspect of that relationship. They want the best outcome for themselves as well.
And the other question I've got just anticipates better than expected success.
To the microphone, Councillor Walker.
The other question just anticipates a better than expected success. I mean, my experiences, for example, the Northern Busway has dramatically exceeded expectations. Our rail patronage has dramatically exceeded expectations. I mean, we consistently get it wrong, frankly. So do we have some flexibility around increasing the numbers, increasing the value of the contract, particularly against a background where we're actually investing in the technology? What is it you mentioned? You know, there's $25 million that we're sinking into design, for example.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, as I said earlier, there is an option for an additional 8 trains if we wanted to choose it, subject to funding and approvals. That would be required potentially if we exceeded the current 8% growth per annum prior to CRL, but we wouldn't be able to get any more capacity into Britomart at that point, prior to CRL.
And the design fee is part of the normal design process on any contract.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Just for clarification at the outset before I ask a few questions, are we looking at that, changing that 207 to 198? Is that the intention now?
No.
It's not? No. Okay, just stays it as it is?
But our intention is to get that down as far as we can.
Why not?
Okay, so it's up, it's not at then, it's up to 207.
That's better.
In principle, yep.
Yeah. So we can at least change that.
Yeah, up to.
It's up to. Questions, probably some more fundamental questions here. I understand that both MOT, AT and I think Auckland Council are involved with the Metro Rail operating model review. This has been going on for a long time. It does interface with these decisions because this review, I understand, looks at how rail is funded nationally and particularly in Auckland. And then we've got section 125 of ATAP, which it's a clear recommendation. And it says that the funding arrangements would benefit from greater consistency, particularly across strategic networks. And then it goes on to specifically say this includes moving to consistent and integrated decision-making for rail. It really emphasises that. We haven't had that, and here we are making another decision in the absence of 2 critical bodies of work. And that worries me. Gentlemen, I will be supporting this today, but it worries me that we're dragging the chain, or somebody's dragging the chain on the operating model review. I'd like to know, when is that going to be landed? And is finance, Ms. Tyndall and yourselves, are you working actively now to resolve that recommendation 125, which I've just referred to? For me, they are critical bodies of work. Otherwise, we'll be doing this again and again.
So I'll just, Councillor Darby, just frame that up because it'll be hard for David to do this for himself. But David has been the most active person trying to create a more strategic relationship around this issue. We have put a number of recommendations forward that haven't actually been accepted. And we would like to see this resolved, but probably no one has done more, or had more initiative around trying to get this done than David. So this is somewhat a little out of our hands, and David can talk specifically to it. But we are very frustrated with this because it's been years now since David first raised this with our board, which our board did actually support. So, David.
Probably a topic beyond this, but perhaps through the chair I could say this procurement process will not impinge in either way whatever happens, because we actually physically need the rolling stock to move people. The studies that are being driven by MOT and NZTA at the moment are actually looking at the overall Auckland and national structures and interfaces. Whatever the outcome of that is, we will still have to have rolling stock. We will still have to have an operator. So we are working within that confine to say we will still need this to move people. And I guess we've taken the view that if you're going to wait for those decisions to be made, we've been waiting nearly 5 years now for some of those conversations. So you wouldn't have anybody moving anywhere if we didn't.
Okay, and I understand that, and I'll come back to that when I speak to this. The second question is on the A1, the funding at least 50%. So are you anticipating in the wording that you've provided there of a FAR rate, funding assistance rate, of possibly greater than 50% as you negotiate with the NZTA? And would that take into account the possible deferral of full electrification, which is of, well, possible benefit to NZTA? Would that go into the the far rate discussion that you were referring to under the Roman one?
Well, the current FAR from NZTA, as they've advised us, is 51. So this was a round number that we worked on. They may be prepared to change the FAR, and we have opened that conversation with them on a number of other points that I've mentioned around this table before. And I think from a practical point of view, it's always open, but we're working on their standard position that the FAR for Auckland's 50% in round numbers. And there is a policy position that they had from about 2011 that the FAR moved from 60 down to 50 over a 5 or 6 year period, which is where we're at now. So they would nearly have to be reversing that decision, but it's always worth a conversation, which is why we wrote it that way.
Yes. Just speaking briefly to this, Mr. Chair, I will be supporting these motions. It's critical that we provide this budget vote. It was signalled, it has been discussed, and it's been in media, it's been discussed here, but probably not in terms of budget quantum, but it's been signalled through ATAP. Additional units were well signalled through ATAP, and we all signed up to ATAP. So there's no surprise there. The surprise, as Councillor Simpson says, is on the quantum, and that's fair. I guess we're wearing our success here. The success is phenomenal, and I think we should acknowledge the success of Auckland Transport, Mark's team, in attracting phenomenal patronage to rail. That's good. What's not resolved are the ongoing issues, the operating model for rail nationally and particularly as it applies to Auckland, and the section of ATAP I referred to. I've mentioned that to the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor, and I think that needs to be in the ATAP refresh. We need to land that. We need to agree on a consistent funding approach for the strategic networks. We don't have that at the moment. That is so important for Auckland. In some respects, for the balance of the country, that's probably not that important. But we are very different in having a strategic roading network and a strategic public transport network. And at the moment, that public transport network is not equitably funded by our funding partners. It's far from it. And if we get this coming before us again without resolving those bigger overarching issues, Auckland ratepayers are going to continue to be funding the strategic public transport network inequitably. We are going to keep wearing it. Now, I know there's a lot of work being done on ATAP, but there are still sections that I'm seeing require attention, and that operating model for rail, which is in some ways outside of ATAP, but inside, it sort of crosses the boundaries, needs to be addressed. I would like to know the full status in coming months of that operating model review, and when the Ministry of Transport, with the partners to it, intend to land real and binding decisions on the operating model for rail.
And we agree with you.
Thank you. And lastly, I hear Dr. Warburton's reply to Councillor Casey's question, which I thought was a very good question on the reprioritisation of the 50 million. I would be concerned if we saw further erosion of the public transport and active transport budget vote. That would be of concern to me, and I'll look forward to seeing what is reprioritised, but it would be a worry to me if I saw an erosion of that budget for Auckland. Thank you.